Hi guys, and welcome back to this class. In the previous class, we had a look at the first person capsule, didn't we? And we added a camera as well. But as we saw, it's still not moving. So when we press play, we're stuck in like a stationary position. Well, in this video, we're going to start setting up a bit more of our game mode so that we can also add some of the commands to move about within the experience. So to do this, what we have to do is we have to set up what Unreal Engine refers to as input mapping. What's input mapping? Well, this is what's used to create the functions or the keys or the ability for you to use your keyboard, your mouse, to move about. Okay, so it's what triggers the events. So we have to tell Unreal Engine that when I move the mouse, I want you to then to execute this action, for example, or when I press this particular key on the keyboard, I then want you to do this, for example, So if we go to the event graph of the first person, it looks familiar, doesn't it? It looks just like any other event graph, maybe one of the event graphs you've seen as a blueprint. So if you right click here on the graph, you'll be able to see, if you type in keyboard, it shows you all of the keyboard events, which are all of the events related to our physical keyboard on our desk. So all of these keys here can be mapped, meaning you can add them to produce a function. For example, S here, the S key on the keyboard, we can set up here, and it's a red node, which means it's an event node. And it's saying that if I press the S key, I have the ability to trigger an event. So when something's pressed, it can do such and such. When I release the key, it will do something different. Normally reverse the effect. But for our character, it's easier if we do all of the project mapping within project settings. And we'll take a look at that later. So in order for us to work with the mouse and the motion, the movement of the mouse, it's a lot easier for us to do it as, we'll do it here basically, which we'll show you later. It's better for us to do it this way, so we don't waste time with blueprints, okay? Now, you may have noticed that we've got these options here for when something's pressed, when something's released, but it doesn't give us the option for a sustained motion. For example, to move a character, I'm going to be using the W, A, S, and D keys on the keyboard. They're the standard buttons for moving, but it won't take one step and then stop. So it won't take one step ahead. It will move until it's released. Okay. So in our case, it's a little bit more complicated than just pressing a button and then releasing it. So as this is an event mode, you're only going to press it once. And then if you press the S key once for a movement, well, it's going to do that and never stop. Okay. So it's a little bit, makes more sense for us to do it in a different way, because our movements of the character are slightly more advanced. So to access our project settings, we'll go to Edit and then click on the Project Settings. And there they are. Great. So these are not Unreal settings. These are just our project settings. Okay. So for our particular project, which is BP ArcViz 2, these are the settings that we can adjust for this specific level or this specific project. So if I change anything here, it's going to affect everything in my project, all of our levels. So we need to map this and tell it what's going to happen when certain buttons are pressed or when there's certain movements of the mouse. So let's have a look at how we can do this. To do it, we need to go to the section under Engine and look for Input. And we have our bindings here. And this is where we can create the action and the axis mappings, where we can sort out what our buttons are going to do. So what's the difference between action and axis? Well, action is what I mentioned in the blueprint, the ability that you have to push, for example, a key on the keyboard, for like S, for example, and then execute the event that we're associating with it. So it will execute it once. It doesn't notice or doesn't realize if you're keeping the button down. It will execute this function and that's it. And the axis map works slightly differently, because the axis maps has the ability to recognize if you're pushing the motion keys, and it also recognizes the mouse motions as well, or the movement of the mouse. So the movement of the mouse, for example, we can control here too, and those are used normally in games such as games that use a joystick, or maybe there's other types of movement, normally a joystick or a steering wheel, perhaps, if you have those in games. It's been a while since I've played games like that, but that's the type of movement we're talking about. So in some games, maybe like a PlayStation control, the more you move a stick in a particular direction, the more power you might provide. Okay, so it recognizes all of these movements under this section here. It's quite a common theme, a common ability in racing games as well. When you push on the pedal, it recognizes the amount of pressure you're adding. So if we add an action mapping to the accelerator, as soon as you push it down, it would be like stepping on a pedal all the way to the end. But the accelerator has a grading, so you can step on it lightly and it will accelerate just a bit, or you can step on it heavily and it will accelerate more. So it has this sense of pressure. So let's say that these are the essential differences between the two. So we have to set up our axis maps, which are the character or the mouse motions, the W, A, S, and D keys, which will identify the direction it's moving in. But let's begin with the basics. What do we have here? Well, this is an empty section, so I have to create an axis map, and there's a little button here to add, and if I click it, it adds it. So it's open now. The first node I'm going to create is the which one? The mouse. Let's do that one. So this is the mouse we see on the screen. Okay, it's like a vision node, so we can look around. We usually name it turn, and let's call it. We could call it turn like that, as if we're rotating our head. When we move the mouse left to right, the screen's going to move as well. So the subcategory will open. We can select from these. There's several subcategories, and here you'll see settings for keyboards, joystick, and mice as well. Okay, and even PS4 too. I think some Xbox buttons. There you go, and some virtual reality. But let's focus only on the keyboard and the concepts that work for our computer setup. Okay, so this is the turning motion, the motion of looking left and right, and it's done with the mouse. So let's open up the mouse category, and here you can see there are many options, and we'll use it as the x-axis. The x-axis, as we know, is from left to right. Y is up and down. Okay, so let's use this for mouse X. So we're looking left and right, and now we have to go and do the up and down one. So we can call that look up. So it looks up and down. And here I'll use the mouse for that. There you go, mouse Y. Great. And there's a scale detail as well, but we'll talk about that later on. We'll keep it as 1 for now. And now I'll create the others for the character. Not the camera though. We'll just do the others for the character at this stage. Okay, so I need to create the ability to move forward. So let's call this one move forward. And then we're basically assigning the button that's going to move forward, which would be W in our case. So type in W and find the one associated next to the keyboard. There we go. Scale 1 is fine. And now we can make another one. So we're adding another one, and let's call this one. This will be move backwards. Okay, we've got move forward. We need move backwards. But next to this one here, the movement, because it's doing the opposite, we can actually do this. So we've got W for forward. The one for backwards would be S. So all we need to do to add the opposite is add an S underneath and have a different scale. Because one is moving forward, and if we had -1, it's going to move backwards. So all we have to do is add another one here and put S in here. So it's going to use the S key on the keyboard. Let's type in, I can't find it now. Let me search again. Let's try, I'm under keyboard. Sometimes just do it manually, it's easier. Find S and set the scale to -1. Got it? Does that make sense? So 1 is positive, -1 is negative. Okay, so 1 will move us forward in W, and then S will move us backwards. And I will sort all this out when we start doing the programming a little bit later on. But the character is set up okay so far. We need to continue though. We need to add some more movement. So we've got W and S moving backwards and forwards using 1 and -1. Now let's set up the last one we need for now. What do you think that is? That's it, moving right, okay? And for this, we'll use the key of D on the keyboard. So let's search for D. There we go. And a scale of 1, because that will move it right. And we're going to use exactly the same principle as the previous one. And A is the key for moving left. So rather than using the scale 1, we're going to use a scale of -1. So it's going to move in the opposite direction to the D key. So we have our basic movements here, and it's already set up for our character to be able to start thinking about moving. And that's a first look at the input settings. So well done if you got that far. So we've got our controls now set up. Let's start to create the programming within the event graph of our character. So what do we have to do from here? Well, what's the first thing we need to think about? Well, let's begin right at the start. Let's begin by thinking about the movement of our mouse. The first control we put in was looking left and right, wasn't it? Which we said is similar to your head movement. So we have our character. We have the motion of W and S moving backwards and forwards. So W is going to walk onwards, forwards with the capsule, right? Because we have the whole, the whole capsule is going to be moving. S is going to take the person backwards, and the camera will follow along that route, okay? And the A key makes it move left. The D key makes it move towards the right. Okay, so the whole capsule is going to move. Now, with regard to the motion of the mouse, nothing regarding the capsule moves its position or location. It's just the rotation that moves. Okay, so we'll be able to look up, down, left, and right the same way you can do it in real life, and you'll usually just do it, obviously just move your neck, but here in Unreal it's going to be moving the camera position up, down, left, and right, okay, to mimic what our eyes would be doing, just like this. Okay, so obviously in real life you don't move your whole body necessarily to move left and right. You can just look with your head, can't you? And that's what we're reproducing here with the movement of the camera. So let's begin to make it look left and right. So how do we do that? Well, to do that, we need to rotate the camera along the correct axis, okay? Which is the axis called yaw, Y-A-W, okay? That's the axis we're moving it along. So to Unreal, when something's rotating at X, it's called yaw, Y-A-W. Okay, that's the name that's used for that. So you can see that when I click on it and release it, you can see it says it on the screen, the angle, and it's on the axis called yaw. So what we have to do is edit that axis. So to be able to look at the sides, we'll use Y-A-W, yaw, to understand, okay? I think I did, oh, let me just reset this actually. Okay, cool. Let's do it this way. Let's animate and control the camera motions. First thing I need to do is, do you remember the principles we were following in the previous videos? The when, who, and the what. So let's find out what's the when. Well, when does the character look sideways? Well, the who is it that looks sideways? The character, okay? The character looking sideways, but in our case here, it's the camera. So the what will be the camera rotation. So when the character is executing this motion, like when I'm moving the mouse, then I should create an event that will trigger that. So when I move the mouse, it triggers the function. So the first thing then I need to do is define the event. Now, since we've created the inputs, that should help us because we've already pre-configured them. So I can type in the very name that I gave to these inputs in the project settings, such as turn. If I type in turn, see it's already got the input here because we've already set them up in our settings. So I can click on this and it's going to create the ability for me to attach it to a function. So let me just go back here 1 second because I think I need to rename them slightly differently. Let's turn that turn 2, I'll call it that, just to make it easier to see. And let's right click and type in turn. Okay, right. So now we can see for definite that this is the axis event because there was already one named turn. Now you can see that it already recognized the input, which is great. And this is really cool. It's a cool thing about Unreal because it makes it easier for us to access, and you can just go back and make changes to names if you want to. So there we go. I'm going to create an event node like this, which is red, as you know now, and you can see it's the action icon, the event icon. I'm going to create an event that's understanding when we're moving the mouse. Let's open project settings and we're just going to check what we've got set up in the input. So it's understanding that it's the mouse moving along the X axis. That's going to affect the movement of the character or the camera. So we do get some help in putting this together. A lot of the hard work is done in the engine, but the important things I will be showing you here that we need to do. Let's put in our print string so we can see on screen exactly what's happening. We just plug everything in here and let's see when we push play. So now if I move the mouse to the right, do you see what's happening? When I move left as well, it's showing minus. And when I stop, it goes to 0. So if I don't move the mouse, it goes to 0. But if I move it a little bit, if I move it right, it goes higher in value, and left, it goes to negative values. Okay, so it's reading the movement of the mouse, which is great. This is what we want it to do, right? So what do we need to do now? Well, we need then to control the character, don't we? So we already have a preset node called add controller. So let's add this in. Okay, so it already understands that we want to be using the direction of yaw, which correlates to the X axis. So that's great. We need that. So that's going to give us the ability to control the movement. I don't need to tell it to get the reference of a camera and all of that, because this does exactly the same thing. So it's a lot easier doing it this way. So let's interpret this and understand what's going on. So we have this function as part of our flow control. It has a target. So what's it going to be? That's going to be the character. So in this case, we're in the blueprint, aren't we, of the character? So it's already got it because it's target being itself. We don't need to add anything in there. So that's all fine so far. Now, what I do need to do is connect these, and that will bring over the mouse movement and connect it to the direction of the camera along the yaw axis. So let's have a go. See that? So it's connected to the camera, and I move left and right, it will move the camera along the X axis. And that's it. So now our camera and our characters starting to move, right? Looking good. So now we'll make it look up and down. So let's add the look up event. We just typed it in here. And there we go. We've got this one. It's the same idea as what we've done before. I don't need to really go over it again. But this essentially, as you expect, is going to control our ability to look up and down. It's doing this movement, okay? And you see it's showing here on the viewport, it's the pitch that's affected. So before we had the yaw, and now this axis, which is the y-axis, in the camera world is called the pitch, okay? So same process here, and let's get the other node. So we need to add controller pitch. There we go. So I've got same nodes, but for different axes, okay? So this is going to affect the rotation of the pitch. We'll add the value in, press play, and let's see. We can move left and right. Can we move up and down? Let me do it again. Just play. So we can move left and right with our mouse, but it doesn't seem to be moving up and down. Doesn't let me move there. Why is that? Well, let's take a look. Should it allow it? Well, it should, if we've done it correctly. It should allow us to make that change. So let's try and work out what's preventing it. Well, there is a function here in our camera that for some reason might be controlling other characters. Let me just double check something. Because if that is the case, then it's going to give us a limit. And it stops us from moving up and down. Okay, so we can only look left and right. But if you go to the camera options and check the details, you can see it says use pawn control rotation. So what you're saying is you can use the pawn rotation controls, it's fine. And you can just enable it here. So let's test it again. There we go. But there is that little detail that you can't see up my mouse anymore. Okay, so I can move left and right and up and down. Okay. But, you know, we've lost our mouse from the screen. We'll look at how to fix that later on. But it's, you know, sufficient to say that we got the movement working. Now we've already added the camera movement for looking up and down. So, and we've done left and right. So the next step now is to think about how we actually get the character to move. For example, how do we get them to move forwards, to move backwards, sideways? Because for now, at this stage, our character can't do that. It's all tied up to only being able to move the head, which is not exactly what we need, is it? So let's have a look at how to do that. Very similar principle, but first I'll just comment this and we'll call it camera movement. Okay, so that's, sorry, not a camera, mouse movement. Okay, so we have this first, which is great, and we've all grouped them together. Let's move on to our keyboard. Let's get this set up. So we need to right click, and we're going to use the same principle, call the actions from what we set up. So we need move forward, and it's the same action or event node. So when we push W, it's going to execute this action. Okay, just as I've got set up here. And then that also means that when I press S, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to move backwards. Okay, so it's the same event, but the values change. So we have a node for this, which we'll call it add movement input. And the target is itself, the pawn. Now we can do this the same as we did before. We could just get the capsule and make the movement, but since it's already the actual blueprint itself that we're talking about, we don't have to get and to plug it into the target, because the target is itself, which is great. Plug the axis in, and that connects that's going to connect to the scale value that we've set up as well in the project settings. So it will see that when I'm pressing the key, it's going to keep to the scale that we've set up. And when I press the S key, it's going to go backwards at the same rate as well. We'll just put a print string in so we can see what's happening on screen. Now, let's just connect that here. Okay, there we go. So now we've got the print string going before the movement input, and I'll just leave it like this for now. And then when we go into play, we'll just see, plug it in there. When we go into play, we'll see what happens. So it shows 0 all the time at the moment. And I'm not pushing anything. I'm not pressing any of the keys, but it's telling the engine that nothing's happening because I'm in the 0 position. I'm standing still, okay? And it's just repeating itself. So when the lines are filled, it doesn't seem like there's any movement going on because it's continuing to give 0. If I push W, it should show 1. Okay, so it's still at 1, and now I've released it, is 0. Push, release, push, release. So what happens? Well, it's sending that value, isn't it? All the time. So there's no difference. Okay, remember the mouse, there was a value that kept changing, wasn't it? So that was sensitive to my movement. For the keys, there isn't that sensitivity. You're either pushing it or you're not. So there's no in between. So here, this node interprets this. It understands that you're pushing W and it does it. Okay. And obviously for us, we know that's going in that specific direction. So as you're pushing W, it will always be adding the value of 1. And if we're pushing S, it's going to do exactly the same. And I believe the value of 1 is like moving like 1 centimeter at a time. However, I think you understand the principle. This type of mapping will just respond to your input on the keyboard, whereas the mouse is more sensitive. Okay. And it doesn't matter how gentle you press the W on the keyboard, it's gonna, if you detects you've pressed it, it's gonna move. Okay, so that just gives us a live example, really, of the difference between the different types of mapping between the mouse and the keyboard. Okay, so now we have to think about what side do we want to be moving. Now, I don't know which side I want to move. I'm guessing a value, but I don't know which side it is. So we have to tell it that when I push W or when I push S, I'm going to be moving forward or backwards in a direction of wherever the capsule is facing. So we're going to be moving our capsule now in the direction of the arrow, and this can all depend on where we're facing, can't it? So to do this, first we have to search for the capsule component, right? So I'll pick up the capsule component and I'll just drop it here. So this is our variable here, and which is our reference point to the capsule component. On top of that, since the capsule is our root, I can also pull in everything that's attached to it. So here I can search for preset information, which is like get forward vector. We can get that. And that picks up the vector forward direction to be literal or a frontal direction. So you know it works out whether I'm going forward or not. Okay, so I can choose that. So that's going to interpret the movement for us, the forward direction. Now I want the direction on my vector, so I want to move forward. So I'm going to generate a vector here, and I'll link it to the world direction, which is not relative. And that's why I have to get the character's direction. Now I've linked them now. So it should recognize our capsule now and find the vector that it's connected to, its direction. And now it will add the value or the scale value of 1, as long as I'm pressing the W key. Let me just get rid of the print string, and there we go. So if I push W, there we go. We're moving forward, and pressing S moves backwards. Okay, W forward, S -1. So it's moving it according to the value that I've set of 1 being positive, -1 negative. So that's basically it, really. And this is what we have to do in our case of moving forward. But there is now just the one last movement to put in. And that's moving sideways, isn't it? And again, we're going to be using the capsule, not the camera. So we've created our event called move right. So we'll use that. Great. And now we need to get the correct function here. So this is going to be very similar to what we've just done. Still need to add the movement of our pawn. So the difference between this though is it's moving sideways, isn't it, rather than backwards and forwards. So I can type in again, plug it in there. That's going to move that motion. The function is exactly the same, just the direction is different. And plug the scale in, plug it into that one. Now you can adjust the scale if you want to. If I use 2 here instead, we're going 1 by 1. Let's set it here to check how it is. Okay, and let's add our value in there. Let's have a look. Okay, so it's at 0, but if I push it, it's now at 2 now. Backwards, it's changed to -1. So it moves faster when you're going forward than when you're going backwards. So at least you can see now what the values do. The higher the value, the lower the value, okay? So we're all set here. Now all I need to do is tell it what I want to move, and that's to the right I want to move and the left. So we'll keep this capsule variable, and we can just go get right, which is a vector, get right vector. So if the vector's pointing forward, its right side is this way. Okay, if it's facing that side, then the right side is this way. It figures it out. Okay, it works out what's west and east, and then just plug that in here. So now the character should walk perpendicularly to the front. Okay, as if the vector rotated, but you know, it's almost like saying, yes, it's got a compass. It works out. If I know the arrow is pointing north, I can now press A and D to move the relative left and right to where I am. And our mouse is moving too. Nice. Great. So now I'm able to move in all of the directions that I've set up. Forwards, backwards, sideways, and up and down, everything. Let's just comment on this so we keep it organized. And there we go, keyboard movement. So we're going to be having lots of different blueprints in this first person. So that's a really good opportunity for us to keep things organized by giving us the appropriate comments around them. Okay, so in this concept, I showed you what we use in first person games and how to get that set up. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm moving and I'm just gently moving the mouse. And it moves quite quickly. It moves really fast. Now, for ArcViz experiences, that might not work. That might be too quickly for us, because you're going to be looking around an architectural scene and you don't want to be going really fast, do you? You want to be taking your time to explore the beautiful projects that you no doubt are being making. So if it's moving too fast for you and you want it to be more realistic, and that's what we're working on, isn't it? Creating realistic experiences. Then in that case, we need to be reducing the speed so it's not too sensitive. Now, how would you go about reducing the speed? Well, there are a couple of ways to do it. In fact, there are 2 ways to do it, and we can edit our scale. That's what we need to start with. We can do it here. So I'll set each value for half of what it is now. So let's just adjust that. So instead of 1, I'll do it for 0.5. Okay, but it might not notice it's that much slower now. Let's go back to over here. Let's adjust project settings. Put it back to 1. And let's do the same movement. Press play. See if you spot the difference. So this is at 1. Now let me try 0.5. Try half of that movement. Let's jump back in. See if you can tell the difference. Can you tell it's slower now? Now, this is important for ArcViz because, you know, we don't want to force the user to be like thrown around, do we? We want them to have the ability to look and take in the experience. So let's try 0.2, just so it's a little easier on the eye. Okay. So it might be flickering on your screen at the moment, but that's not related to the engine. But it's slightly better, much better for navigation purposes. We're not in a racing game, are we? We're just taking our time through the scene. But maybe a value of 0.5 is sufficient for you. But that's where you can adjust the movement and the sensitivity of the mouse. So see what works for you. I think 0.5 is reasonable for us. Okay. So we've created the movement, and this is the character that we've got set up now. It can move around the scene. We can look around, we can look right, look left, and we can use our keys on the keyboard as we've got set up. So well done if you got this far. That's it for this video now. This is this phase of the character complete. We're going to move on to add in the running movement as well later on. It might be a bit weird for ArcViz, but we'll show you how it works. Okay, it's all dependent, of course, on the size of your scene. Especially if you've got a big one, you don't want to be walking around really slow everywhere. It'd be nice to have that ability, wouldn't it, to just adjust your speed. Okay, so I'll show you how you can adjust the speed of the character walking just by using, let's say, the shift key on the keyboard. We'll also add the crouch function as well, the ability for them to almost like get down on your knees or take a look from a different angle, and as well as adding the feature to autofocus. So we'll take a look at all of those features in the next upcoming classes. So take care, and I'll see you then.